40 years ago today, on the 5th of June, 1985, a momentous event in world history happened. It was the day that Ferris Bueller took his day off. And I'm not talking about that at all today. No, absolutely not. My name is Mark. This is my NOTCAST. It's not a podcast. It's a dude talking to his phone about records or CDs in his collection and periods of an artist's history. And the algorithm tells me that the vast majority of people will tab out and close it in less than a minute. So you're going to miss out on all the good stuff because I am going to be talking about Morrissey's 5th solo record released in August 1997, Maladjusted. I'm going to be talking about the court case. I'm going to be talking about the famous court case, the one everybody has, 2 or 3 really traumatic events in their life. And according to the 58 or so pages, 47 pages, that the court case is apportioned in Morrissey's autobiography, I can guarantee it's the most awful thing that ever happened in the history of anybody, ever, anywhere. And, as Morrissey's drummer said, if you want to piss off Morrissey, if you want to hurt Morrissey, if you want to annoy Morrissey, it's money. If there's one thing that annoys Morrissey, it's money. And boy, well, which drummer? Because he's had quite a few drummers, and at least 2 of them he's disconnected himself from or found persona non grata because of money. But in order to get to that dirt, you have to spend a little bit of time talking about what happened after the court case, not what happened before. Morrissey's 5th solo album, Maladjusted, released in summer 1997, is the thing. This is the last of the Morrissey albums to be released during his first flush of solo fame. So that is from 1987 to 1997. The cliche is people make their best work, their most well-known work in the first 10 years of their career. And Morrissey's solo career is no exception. You think of great songs from Morrissey's solo career, you don't think of The Youngest Was the Most Loved. You think of Every Day's Like Sunday, Suede Head, the last of the International Playboys, or the last of the famous International Playboys, in fact. You think about Interesting Drug. You don't think about Pregnant from the Last Time, but you do kind of think about You're the One for Me, Fatty. The more you ignore me, the closer I get. And those first 10 years had the albums Viva Hate, Boner Drag, obviously a compilation. Kill Uncle, a work of deathless genius. Your Arsenal, Vauxhall and I, Southpaw Grammar, and now finally Maladjusted. This is the original 1997 CD. No, I'm not a vinyl wanker who has it on vinyl because it's not that good and it's certainly not worth the money that people want you to pay for it on vinyl. Also, it probably should have been reissued by now, but it isn't, and the fact that it isn't doesn't really matter. Is Maladjusted any good? Well, in the great scheme of things, it's just another Morrissey album. And just another Morrissey album is, of course, generally quite a good thing. As we get further into his discography and further into his fiefdom, might be the word, you end up getting to the point where, and a lot of artists get to this, especially solo artists, I'm thinking particularly about people like Prince, Van Morrison, people like that, is that they need someone to push back against them, somebody that tells them no. And at this point in Morrissey's career, people were still telling him no. And that meant that he had almost like a creative radar or sonar that would bounce back the reflection of what he was planning on doing and kind of advise him to maybe you want to tone down certain things or maybe choose slightly different tracks. The problem is when an artist is in an echo chamber surrounded by yes men who tell them that their every idea is an amazing work of genius and every failure is nothing to do with them but the work of jealous sabotage by underlings who are merely envious of his fantastic creative genius. And then you end up with the last 100 or so pages of this book, which is not that fun a read. But that's jumping ahead of the game a little bit. Maladjusted is good. It's not great. It has some very, very good Morrissey songs on it. I can quickly point out Ambitious Outsiders is good, Wide to Receive. I mean, generally, I could just read through the list of the songs that's on the back, and with the exception of one of them, I think I could say that they're all very good and well worth your time. The one of them that isn't is one we will get to later. Maladjusted, though, as Morrissey describes it in an interview, he said that it was, and I'm going to quote him here, he said, "I made too many mistakes to work with Steve Lillywhite a third time. A label that showed no interest in me. The press was killing me. Radio wasn't playing my records. I began doubting." And that is an interesting thing, because if you think of validation and success as coming from other people and their recognition of your works, you are in danger of ending up playing to the gallery and not playing to the art. And I've seen that where artists kind of second guess what they think their audience wants. Some people, of course, have made whole careers out of that and been very successful at it. Some people haven't. I said, as my mum used to say, you'll get what you're given and you'll bloody well like it. Well, obviously the world got what they were given. They didn't have to like it. They certainly didn't. Because at the time that Alma Matters came out, the first single from the album, the rest of the world had changed beyond all recognition. It was July 1997. This got to number 16 in the charts, just number 16. At that point, of course, Oasis had put Do You Know What I Mean out as a single, which had sold approximately 55 million copies before breakfast. And the Blur were really successful. Pulp were just coming off the back of Common People. Radiohead had just issued Paranoid Android and headlined Glastonbury. Morrissey was looking like yesterday's man. And I'm afraid to say, it was being reflected in some of what he was doing as well, artistically and creatively. Alma Matters is, I think, a good first single. It's not amazing. It's still part of his live sets to these days. Not that I've seen Morrissey for quite some time, but it is a good, solid song. It would sit very well, buried down about 2/3 of the way through any artist's greatest hit set, as that kind of late career track, which is quite good, but you've forgotten how good it is until you hear it and go, oh, that one, that's quite good, isn't it? It is a call for sexual emancipation, and that's really interesting when you think about the lyrics to Alma Matters. It's about embracing our full selves. It's about fulfilling who you really are and being honest about that and going, this is me, this is who I am, and owning that and not being ashamed of it. It does quote from Sheila Delaney in A Taste of Honey, that fabulous line about it's my life to ruin my own way. And of course, you're never more than about 50 minutes away from a quote by Sheila or from something from A Taste of Honey, one of those pivotal works of art which imprinted itself onto Morrissey like a scar or a cheap tattoo of a sailor's anchor. And there's that lyric in here. Now, Alma Matters, as a lyric, by the way, is, I think, quite underrated. It's not necessarily thought about very much. The lyric about, no, the choice I have made may seem strange to you, but who asked you anyway? It's my life to wreck my own way. And I should point out, if you read the lyric booklet in the CD, the word in part and in whole is spelt with just a H, no W, implying a sexual, smutty innuendo there, although there is later on in the lyric booklet an egregious spelling mistake that clearly shows that you shouldn't necessarily take to heart the full lyric as the entire and definitive story and word of God. But there you go. So Alma Matters only got to number 16 in the charts. Paranoid Android, I think, got to number 1. Do You Know What I Mean got to number 1. Blur were deep in there doing Song 2 and no doubt getting to number 1 all over the world with Song 2. Although I don't think they actually sold that many copies as a single. This stumbled to the finish line at number 16. And there were loads of reasons for that. The first one is, no matter how good you are as an artist, at a certain point, the eye of Sauron, the lens of popular culture, will move away from you and onto somebody new. You will always become somebody with a target on your back, and you'll always become someone who once was. Or, as Morrissey put on one of the B-sides, now I am a was. This is where you have to recognise that nobody stays at the top forever. God, I wish someone had taken Bono to one side and go, dude, you're 60. You are not going to be as popular as Taylor Swift at that age. You're just not. Grow old gracefully. Stop dyeing your hair. Anyway, that was a side order being bitchy. This is the problem with Alma Matters. Nothing wrong with it, by the way. If it was a Smith single, people would have gone, yeah, very good, very good. Just another Smith single. But it wasn't. It was a Morrissey single. It was the first single on the Island Records. They're using the old logo. And as he said, the label didn't really care about him. It was almost as if, and I remember talking to an EMI rep in 1996, talking about legacy bands that had been popular once, that you bought because you knew they were going to sell a certain amount of copies. They were never going to set the world on fire. They were never going to be the next big thing. They were going to sell enough. And specifically talking to the EMI rep about Electronic and their Raise the Pressure album, is that the rep said, yeah, it's going to sell okay. It's going to make a profit. That's why we do it. You know, it's not like fantastic, new or innovative or anything like that. Alma Matters is the same thing. It's just another Morrissey single. And that is not to criticise it at all. There is some fantastic songwriting on this album, on this single, in this period. Alan White, Morrissey's co-writer, who I think has written more songs with Morrissey than anybody else on the planet that have been released, does some fantastic work on this record. The bass is very solid. I think Johnny does a great job on there. Boz does a fantastic job with the songs that he's written as well. Everything in this period is great. I think there's lots of really good stuff, apart from one song, and also given the fact that, again, the Eye of Sauron, the Eye of Culture, has moved on to Radiohead and Oasis. Morrissey is purely by the virtue of time, yesterday's news, and that in itself is perhaps a scary place to be. For Morrissey, 1996 was a year of silence. There was no recording, there were no shows, no touring. Oasis soared to excess and success, and they headlined Nebworth, 2 nights in a row, became the biggest band on the planet. Morrissey did nothing, and that is down to many other things, including an alleged crisis of confidence. And also, he was due to record an EP in January 1996, according to reports, with Joe Strummer producing, but that was cancelled at one day's notice. Who cancelled it? I don't quite know. Southpaw Grammar, as an album, had been toured with, 4 headline shows in Japan and a support slot with David Bowie in the UK that didn't even get to the full end of the tour. A mooted 1996 US tour was cancelled. Instead, 1996 was monopolised by a court case, which will show up later on in the episode. And in January 1997, Morrissey took his band to Hook End Studios, where they recorded an album, originally titled Ambitious Outsiders. It was vocally unadventurous. It was lyrically sometimes very slight and sometimes downright sloppy. And there was a lack of focus around this period. Morrissey outsourced certain things. So, for example, the cover art for the original Maladjusted, which he dislikes immensely, probably says something undoubtedly bitchy and rancorous about in here, is, again, just a photo of Morrissey, where you get to see the wear and the crotch of his jeans, most prominently placed in the centre of the album alongside this. This cover is not good compared to every other Morrissey album. This cover does not communicate anything of great meaning at all. There's no sense that it's anything apart from somebody who looked at the 16 contact shots from the photo session, undoubtedly, although this probably wasn't by Anton Corbett, it might look like it. This photography is by Rankin, and went, we've paid Rankin a load of money, we're going to use one of those photos. That's the least worst one. That'll do. The lack of focus shows there. And it shows in other things, the album was toured, but not hugely. The UK tour consisted of 2 dates, one in Battersea Power Station's abandoned grounds in a marquee, and the other one in Chester Northgate Arena on the border of Wales. So Morrissey hadn't played a show in Manchester for a very, very long time indeed. It was something like 7 years between shows in Manchester, which, given that you're an artist from Manchester, is quite a long time indeed. We also had a sense of commercial underperformance. So the album got to number 8 in the UK. It got to number 60 in America. It was pretty much dead on arrival. And even though Morrissey toured America a lot for his most number of shows, I think, ever at that point as a solo artist. The album didn't do particularly well. The sense of excitement wasn't there. So the sense that you had for 1992, 1991, it wasn't there. It had been 5 years since Morrissey had last toured, and there was this huge demographic gap there around Maladjusted. So if you were 17 when Morrissey toured Your Arsenal, you were 22 by the time Morrissey came back for Maladjusted, and you could completely, you've gone to university, you've graduated, you've got a job, you're working in, bumblefuck nowhere or wherever it is. You've then missed a whole generation of fans at that point. People who at 16 might have thought that Morrissey was the indie Jesus who could cure them of their sad boy leprosy. And I say that with love because I was one once. And then you kind of go to the point where you kind of go, you're 22, 23, he hasn't played for 5 years, and you kind of go, sometimes people feel like they've grown out of bands when they get to that age. And I did do this when I was talking about The Cure's Wild Mood Swings and Depeche Mode's Ultra and New Order, is that there was that sense of, once somebody had been famous and popular for maybe 10, 15 years, is that the first generation of fans had far outstripped their adolescence. And adolescence is the age where you get madly into music. Some people never stop. Hello, guilty as charged. Other people kind of zone out of it and they take up other interests. And for example, 15 years into his career, Morrissey's first wave of fans had graduated from being 15-year-olds to being 30-year-olds, from being 20-year-olds to being 35-year-olds. You have a very different worldview, many people, and a very different experience at that point. You kind of age out of necessarily, especially where perhaps somebody's lyrical obsessions might be regarded as quite adolescent. Questions about who am I, where am I, why am I here, what am I going to be, what is this life that we're looking for, all that type of stuff. Heaven knows I'm miserable now, what difference does it make? All those kind of questions. And you end up kind of going, maybe if you haven't kept yourself visible, the newer people, the newer fans, the 20-year-olds, the 15-year-olds, they've graduated to Pulp, to Blur, to Suede, to Oasis, to Radiohead. And that's kind of a difficult position to be in, hence Morris's statement about, for example, the press was killing me, radio wasn't playing me, I began doubting. That said, taken from a now 28-year distance, Maladjusted has many, many, many great things about it. If nothing else, the quality of the songwriting has not been affected at all. The title track, Maladjusted, Alma Mater's, Ambitious Outsiders, musically, everything on this album is pretty damn strong. Even the worst song in my entire record collection. And yes, I'm coming to talk about you. Sorrow will come in the end. Your time is going to come. The title track, Maladjusted, which takes its quote from, and let me just quickly quote this because I've written it down, the cockle shell heroes on this glorious occasion of our glorious defeat, of the splendid defeat. Quote from Anthony Newley is a very interesting song that sets out almost the mindset of it, about being permanently maladjusted, about permanently not quite fitting into the society, like being a square peg in a round hole. That's how Morrissey was characterising himself and many of his listeners as ambitious outsiders, people that didn't quite fit in to the reality that had been given to them. A reality that also, by the way, had been mocked quite derisively in the video for Dagenham Dave, Dagenham Dave, Dagenham Dave, standing at the urinal with the whole world in his hands. That was the kind of environment that he was setting his stall out of, as somebody that didn't quite fit in. And in the lyrics to Maladjusted, the elements where he sings, for example, about Fulham Road lights, Stevenage overspills, SW6 with someone like you, oh Christ, another stifled Friday night, and the Fulham Road lights. And there's a whole song about feeling excluded from society, about wanting to be part of, being carried away, by being caught in the fray of everything, that sense that perpetually of being on the outside of a reality that you didn't quite have access to. And it sets its stall out as a track very, very clearly. I think Maladjusted is very good as a song. It certainly couldn't fit anywhere on the album but as the opening track. And then it's followed up with Alma Matters, of course, another song about, for example, identity, exploration, finding yourself, sexual emancipation. And no one going into number 16 with a bullet. And you get to track 3, which is Ambitious Outsiders. And, well, this album is not mucking about. Ambitious Outsiders is great. It's built on perhaps for the first time with Morrissey's solo band, kind of stepping outside of what you call the traditional kind of guitar, bass, drums, rock format into something that's more orchestral, more ambitious, more dramatic, more sweeping. But again, it's a song about being excluded, an excluded element of society. And again, changing the title from Ambitious Outsiders of the album to Maladjusted, it still tells the same story, as that you feel somehow that you're not quite part of the reality in which you're being forced to exist. And then there's that lyric about bolt lock your doors, alarm your cars, and we're still moving closer every day. It doesn't matter how many times you put up barriers, you erect walls. These people that you don't want to recognise exist, they still exist. They're still part of reality. They're still part of the world that's outside your window. And it's a world of dread and fear. Oh God, I just quoted Live 8. Sorry, Live 8. But then there's obviously that lyric about, your tax is paid, but police waylaid, and who knows when the school bus comes and goes. We're on your street, but you don't see us. And there's the chorus refrain is about keeping the population down. And that works in 2 ways. One, about oppressing, repressing, and crushing the people that are part of the population. Because remember, the poor are voters too. And the second part is about keeping the population down, is about keeping the numbers down, is trying to keep the odds in your favour, about trying to triumph over the people. Or as has been said, they might be millionaires, but there are millions of us. You've got to try and keep the numbers down. And I think Ambitious Outsiders is a great song. It really, really is. In fact, much of the album is very, very strong songwriting. Trouble Loves Me, for example, that's another great song, I think. I've seen it played live a number of times. It's quite good in terms of how it works. And again, there's this difference in the songwriting that's more mature. There's no sense whatsoever that the songwriting and the music is anything less than very, very good. Now, you could listen to solo Morrissey, especially this period, and this period is unfairly criticised in a number of ways, because obviously Radiohead, Oasis, etc. made Morrissey look old, and he was, in his 30s-ish, maybe? 37, 38, something like that, maybe? I don't know. I can't remember when he was born, 1959. So he was 38 when this came out. He was seen as an old man. And when I was 38, I didn't think I was old. Morrissey undoubtedly didn't think he was old. After all, isn't the best music really a state of perpetual adolescence anyway? But Trouble Loves Me is, again, got this line about, show me a barrel and watch me scrape it. Faced with the music, as always, I'll face it in the half-light, so English, frowning. And then at midnight, I can't get you out of my head, a disenchanted taste. There's quite an awareness, a sexual innuendo that runs through a number of songs on this album as well, which is absolutely fascinating to hear as an awareness which is not necessarily fully explored in the context of the album. Track 5 is Papa Jack, and if I remember correctly, Papa Jack is not on the 2009 reissue, which is, to be honest, a very, very, very bad idea, because Papa Jack is a great song. I think it's one of the best Morrissey songs of this period. It's got a lyric which is very clearly a self-fulfilling prophecy. It revisits some of the lyrical obsessions and concessions that you had in Little Man What Now. The idea of a vision of the future where you see who you used to be. And again, Papa Jack has got this lyric about Papa Jack in decline feels inclined to reach out to the kids he once had who have flown. But there was a time when the kids reached up and Papa Jack just pushed them away. And what a lyric about the passing of time and the fickle finger of fame and fortune and fate. But there was a time when the kids reached up. Now you can't always have it your way. Perhaps with time, Morrissey realised that was seen to be a self-fulfilling prophecy, because Morrissey was about to enter his wilderness years, 7 years between albums. This was the last album that Morrissey released in the 90s. In that millennia, there wasn't another one until 2004, 7 years later. Papa Jack realised that the kids had turned away. And maybe that's why this song isn't on the reissued version of the album, which is a nice way of saying is if you're a Morrissey fan, you've got to have an original of Maladjusted, because he's deleted that song from the previous reissues. You flip over the album onto side 2, or maybe you do flip over the album onto side 2, and you get Ammunition. And Ammunition is it's the first of the songs that kind of takes up, I think, some of the military motifs that you get to see later on in You Are the Quarry. It's about Morrissey thinking about his position in the world, and I don't need more ammunition. I've got more than I can spend. I don't dwell on things I'm missing. I'm just pleased with the things I've found. Again, revisiting a little bit of Found from Kill Uncle, but at the same point also going, I've got nothing more to be angry about. I am absolutely fuming, and we will hear about that shortly. We undoubtedly will. If it's not great as a song, it's a little beige, but it's very suitable. And again, Morrissey takes a step back during a couple of these songs to allow the band to really, really shine. And there's no sense that it's necessarily a solo artist, but a band with a prominent vocalist. And there is a difference. Oh yeah, there is. Then we get Wide to Receive, the first of the Spencer Colbrin co-writes, I think. And Wide to Receive is a lyric that is oddly prescient. The first time I read it, I was like, Morrissey's writing about the internet. And, you know, that lyric about download something useful or useless, because I'm lying here wide to receive almost anything you'd cared to give. And I don't get along with myself, and I'm not too keen on anyone else. Turn on, plug in, then just walk away. Unlock, process, then just go. And I've never felt quite so alone as I do right now. And that's an interesting lyric. It kind of implies what's known as the late naked lunch moment, or, if you want to use porn talk, post-nut clarity, the bit where you found something on the internet and you've done something, and then the moment afterwards when you realise you're just standing there with your dick in your hand looking ridiculous. Isn't that silly? Yes, it is. Wide to receive kind of implies being a submissive in the relationship as well, that is wide to receive what is being given. Fascinating lyric, a little graphic, not quite as graphic as I have explosive kegs between my legs, but still very interesting for Morrissey to be talking about, for example, such things as Papa Jack and Wide to Receive. He was like, as David Bowie said, a man, the future belongs to a man who can see it coming. And it's a great, great song. Maybe coming is used in two contexts there. But no, Wide to Receive is great. And then the next song, the second single released from the album, another one that was deleted from the reissues, Roy's Keen. You've never seen a keener window cleaner. It got to number 42 in the UK charts. The first Morrissey single to not make the top 40 as a solo artist, I think. Possibly Hold On To Your Friends also missed the top 40. But it was really, you go from number 16 as a single, number 8 as an album, and then suddenly you get to number 42 and you go, people don't really care, do they? There's a very kind of determined, relatively narrow gauge of fans that love Morrissey, but the people that like him, they're buying Pulp albums, they're buying Oasis albums. They're not that bothered about Moz, which is a shame. It's an economic reality, but it's a shame. And Roy's Keane, obviously, is an appalling pun on the footballer Roy Keane. It was regarded by Morrissey as a stinker in 2008, which I think is a little harsh, especially considering the worst song in my record collection is coming up shortly. But also, it is lyrically somewhat empty, and I'm reading the lyric. I don't really know what it's about. I'm not really sure what it's about. Maybe it's about a guy that goes constantly and tries to meet people for romantic liaisons, dangerous, but who knows. Then we have He Cried as track 9, which is a song about never being told he is needed or loved. It's about a song about I need you, simple words, but words which have never been heard by the soul. Stoned to death, but still living, froze where he stood, and he looked to the ground and he cried. Again, there is an element of going, I need recognition, I need affirmation, I need to be effectively, told that I'm good boy, who's the best boy? By the way, yes, the dogs do know that they're the best boy, because everybody keeps telling them they're the best boy. They know they're a good boy. Yes, they do. But He Cries is again a cry of loneliness in nothing. Then we get to track 10. Not only the worst song on this album, not only the worst song that Morrissey has ever recorded, very possibly the worst song in my entire record collection. It is called Sorrow Will Come to You, or Sorrow Will Come in the End. It is on the American CD and it is on reissues. It was never on the UK version of the album. And so therefore I had to go and spend $14.99 of my hard-earned money in 1997 to import this CD from the United States of America to hear a frankly dog shit song. Lyrically, Sorrow Will Come in the End is atrocious. It is juvenile rumblings, and as a listener, I'm sat there going, you, Morrissey, are worth millions of pounds. You have more money than most people will ever earn in their life, and you're moaning about it. It is not a dignified look. And as one of Morrissey's drummers did say, if you ever want to upset Morrissey, if one thing upsets Morrissey, it's money. And oh boy, this is money, because Sorrow Will Come in the End is a direct riposte and a practical musical death threat to the Smiths' former drummer, Mike Joyce, around the court case. The court case that takes up 47 boring pages in Autobiography, whereas Autobiography takes 80 whole pages to talk about the entire of the Smiths. 60% of that is spent again on the court case, with Morrissey telling everyone that he's right. Well, it's not. Especially not when you write a lyric such as, a man who slits throats has time on his hands and I'm going to get you. How could that possibly be interpreted as anything other than an act of practical violence and threat towards somebody? You can't say things like that and not feel threatened by it. Like, really, you pleaded and you squealed and the judge believed, and all this type of stuff, and you think you've won, but sorrow will come to you in the end. I praise the day that brings you pain. The QC's obsessed. I mean, really, grow up, Morrissey. Grow up. Pay Mike the fair amount of money. You don't have to think it's fair, because life isn't about what you think is fair. It's about what is legal and what is judged to be equitable and right, not whether you think he should get his 10% or whatever. Sorrow Will Come in the End is the worst song in my record collection, and such shame that it had to go on this album. Obviously removed from the UK version for, quote, reasons, unquote. The reasons being that it probably could have got him sued by Mike Joyce. The next one, the last song on the album, Satan Rejected My Soul, the last single released by Morrissey during the 90s, and the last single released by Morrissey whilst his record company weren't telling him he should sack his band and get Radiohead in instead, is Sorrow Rejected My Soul. The single got to number 39 in the charts. It is the beginning of an exile. It's almost, again, a self-fulfilling prophecy, like Papa Jack. The idea that Satan rejected my soul. To quote William Burroughs, if the devil offers you a bargain, you should be flattered, because not all souls are worth buying. It's about the end of the glory years, the beginning of the exile. Morrissey almost kind of embracing his obscurity, knowing that he couldn't sell his soul to the devil because the devil didn't think his soul was worth it. A very silly lyric. I really like it. It's funny, makes me laugh, and not many lyrics on this album make me laugh. The idea of him singing, Satan rejected my soul, he knows my kind. He's never quite seen how. He's seen my face around, but he knows heaven doesn't seem to be my home. It's an interesting lyric. It's a good song, great live actually, Satan Rejected My Soul. Very underrated as a single, I think. Very good. But again, only in at number 39 with a bomb. There are extra tracks from this period. Alma Matters has 2 B-sides, Hair Apparent, and I Can Have Both. Hair Apparent is about the next generation coming up, the Oasises, the Blurs, as I've kind of said before. Mortality and the passing of time and the move from a young generation to an older generation very clearly on Morrissey's mind during this time, especially in the lyrics to Papa Jack and Trouble Loves Me and Satan Rejected My Soul. Also Hair Apparent and I Can Have Both, the other track which is on the CD single, which is kind of, it was going to be on the album, but it was replaced at the last minute by Wide to Receive. And I Can Have Both is I think, a song that kind of alludes to bisexuality or omnisexuality, the idea that you're not necessarily defined by the genders of the people that you're attracted to. It's an interesting lyric, it's prescient, it's got some foresight for where the world is going to go next, but it's not necessarily the best one. Roy's Keane has 2 B-sides, Lost, which should have been on the album but wasn't recorded in time, and The Edges Are No Longer Parallel. Lost is a phenomenal song, one of my favourite Morrissey songs of all time. The lyric about a jet plane soars across the sky and everybody thinks they're lost, but they're not. It's beautiful musically. Lyrically, it's aspirational. I've seen Morrissey play it live a couple of times, and it's one of the best songs that solo Morrissey has ever had, is Lost. And it's a lost song, and oh boy, I wish it got more love and more appreciation. And then there was The Edges Are No Longer Parallel, which is not great, I think it's fair to say. And then the last 2 extra tracks are on Satan Rejected My Soul. They are Now I Am a Was, which is again about I started off high and worked my way down. The idea of, again, being aware of the decline in popularity, the change in time, and the status of having once been something to be something else. And then finally, the last song that we had from Morrissey for several years, This Is Not Your Country. 7 minutes and 24 seconds of epic, huge, bombastic, fascinating lyrics about living in or experiencing Belfast and the religious differences and the troubles there, which I have limited experience of, but was obviously at one point very, very important to everybody and quite dramatic. These tracks, the 6 non-album tracks, were scooped up and released in 1998 in Rare Tracks, a Japanese-only 6-track CD. And Rare Tracks, by the way, is really good. I really like it. I strongly recommend it. It has Lost, Hair Apparent, The Edges Are No Longer Parallel, This Is Not Your Country, Now I Am a Was, and I Can Have Both. And I think this is a great little EP, and I think that should Maladjusted get a vinyl issue, Rare Tracks really should get a standalone vinyl issue as well at some point. It is a great little EP, and works very well as a companion piece. Sadly, only released in Japan, now deleted, difficult to get, but well worth having. Rare Tracks, I strongly recommend that. If you are in the US, of course, some of these songs were not necessarily released. Some of the singles were not issued. Instead, you had the standalone, somewhat Bodger and Scarpa compilation from 1998, My Early Burglary Years. And this features a number of songs that were never previously on any Morrissey releases in the US. It's got Sunny at Amber, a live version of Cosmic Dancer, Nobody Loves Us, A Swallow on My Neck, Sister, I'm a Poet, probably a live version actually, Black Eyed Susan, Michael's Bones, I'd Love to. It does get Read to Me Author, which for some reason was on Southpaw Grammar and shouldn't be on here. Passionate Love, Girl Least Likely to, Jack the Ripper, again probably a live version. I've Changed My Plea to Guilty. The Boy Racer, not necessarily necessary. And finally closing off with Boxers. My early burglary years is okay. It is not fantastic. It is an okay B-sides compilation, but it's really kind of like it's Morrissey's version of Build a Bear, where he puts in his own ideas about what should be on there. Is it good? Well, I mean, yeah, it's okay, but it's not wonderful. And of course, at that point in my life, everything that had the words Morrissey on, I bought. At least in terms of CDs. So if you're American, you've probably got My Early Burglary Years, and that's worth getting. Late 1997 also saw the release of Morrissey's first best of, the compilation Suede Head, which I think is now deleted. A double LP single CD of all Morrissey's A-sides on the EMI label, presumably issued as some kind of spoiler capacity because Morrissey didn't sign with EMI for the Maladjusted album, so to make back their investment. And this has all the singles plus That's Entertainment on their first LP appearances for a number of tracks. The whole thing screams contractual obligation. There's not much of interest in terms of on there. It was probably designed to be the type of CD that you would buy from a motorway service station CD rack for £10 when you were bored of listening to Kiss FM on the motorway when you were driving around at some point. These days, of course, everyone has Wi-Fi, they have Spotify, they don't have the need to buy CDs from motorway service stations. So, there you go. In 2009, Maladjusted was reissued. It came in the standard book pack. It came in an expanded version. It had a different track listing, just like Southpaw Grammar. It featured an essay from Morrissey, which is again is disingenuous and flexible with the truth, and new cover art and some new lyrics and things like that. It's got Maladjusted on it. It loses Royce Keane, it loses Papa Jack, it adds for the first time in the UK, Sorrow Will Come in the End, the atrociously worst song which Morrissey ever released. The album was backed up with touring. Here's a bootleg CD recorded in LA, 14 songs recorded at the Greek Theatre, Los Angeles, for the radio, and then a number of extra studio sessions for Modern Rock Live, including Maladjusted, Trouble Loves Me, and Satan Rejected My Soul. This is worth getting, actually. Nice, fun little release. And in the absence of any official live releases, it's worth picking up. But what we do have, the elephant in the courtroom, is the court case, as exhaustively detailed in an act of petty revenge by a millionaire called Sorrow Will Come in the End. The Smiths court case, Mike Joyce sued Morrissey and Johnny Marr for what they regarded as withheld royalties. Johnny Marr spends 5 pages on it. Morrissey spends 47 pages on it. And Morrissey does not come out of it, even in autobiographies, particularly well. Morrissey describes himself as the description as those who served him generously in the past. Well, that's what he described Mickey. He described Mike Joyce as. Sorry, I got confused with Mickey Rourke and Mike Joyce there. It's been a long day. He described Mike Joyce as someone who regarded Morrissey as somebody who served him generously in the past, as if Mike Joyce was unable to have any talent whatsoever and had merely by virtue of luck been selected to be the Smiths drummer, with no inherent power or skill or ability or drumming capacity himself, but was appointed through necessity and rescued from obscurity by Morrissey's absolute genius. Morrissey described them as people who had only ever profited from knowing me, as if somehow Joyce himself had nothing to contribute to the situation at all. And obviously the core part of the court case is that Joyce and Rourke got 10% performance royalties. Morrissey and Marr got 40% each, which means Morrissey and Marr were paid 4 times as much for the performance alone, let alone the songwriting, which of course they split 50-50, even though I think that Andy Rourke was shafted on that because his fabulous bass lines in things like Barbarism Begins at Home and so on were just not noticed at all. Well, I wonder, one of the best bass lines of all time, and yet all he got was a 10% performance royalty for it. The whole thing suggests a ignorance of economic reality. Rourke had settled for 10% in 1989 because he was £44,000 in debt, and he was apparently facing having his home repossessed. He couldn't sustain the court case, whereas obviously Marr and Morrissey, both of whom had earned something like 8 times as much as him, had plenty of money. And in a legal case like that, it's often a war of attrition. The person with the deepest pockets wins purely through the fact that they're able to fight to the death, because the death is obviously further away for them. Morrissey thinks that Marr and he gave Joyce fame, which I think he mentions in page 305 of Autobiography, which is, by implication, undeserved, and that Joyce would obviously be now fast approaching retirement age in a moribund job at Manchester Council, a job which, by the way, I think Morrissey only worked for a week at a job centre he couldn't himself hold down. There's a character assassination of Mike Joyce that is ugly and unnecessary, and of his QC weeks. There are, whereas he says Joyce is nothing and knows nothing. Rourke is lambasted for accepting £89,000 in 1989 because he'd simply run out of money, and couldn't fight it anymore. And there was a huge chunk of it about when Morrissey seems bewildered by the social and legal traditions, things like case law, things like fairness, equity. I'm not suggesting for a second, by the way, that Joyce or Rourke should have got 25% of each of the entire of the Smiths' earnings, but they should have got 25% of the performance for that. They played as part of a quartet on stage every recording session, every show, every TV appearance, every radio session. They were there. They may not have got the artwork, which obviously Morrissey should have been compensated for. They may not have done the production, which Marr should have been compensated for. They may not have written the songs, but they should have got 25% of the performance royalties, and therefore earned 2.5 times more than they actually did being in the Smiths. The overall dereliction of responsibility around that, and of the way of treating people fairly and equally, screams through every line of Autobiography, and it's quite saddening, really. It almost sets out a concept that Morrissey thinks of other people as non-playable characters, and that they're not necessarily meaningful. The only person that's truly meaningful to Morrissey is Morrissey. Everybody else is merely an accessory, a sidekick, or an object to be, not considered with the same degree of empathy. What's clear in this book? Morrissey needs an editor. And because he rambles on for 47 pages, he quotes individual lines of judgment, and the fact that presumably his solicitors read this book and went, that's okay to publish, I probably would have talked him out of that and went, are you sure you really want to do this? Because sometimes you let people hang themselves with their own rope, and what he's saying is actually that he doesn't regard Mike Joyce with any respect or dignity. He doesn't think that he's any good as a drummer, clearly thinks that he only got the job in the Smiths out of desperation from Morrissey and Marr's point of view, and should be grateful for only having 10% of the Smiths' performance royalties for only the 5 years that the band were in existence, which effectively is what, basically 3 months of the Smiths' existence is, the entire sum of money that the Smiths earned during the entire of their life. 80% of it, from a performance royalty perspective, went to Marr and Morrissey, as far as I can tell from these books, and 100% of the songwriting went to Marr and Morrissey, which means that if actually they probably got something like 5% overall of the entire amount of money that the band made in that period, not including things like t-shirts and merchandising and so on. And then you kind of go, why are you begrudging your drummer that? Why do you think that he shouldn't get more than 5% for that? Considering all things, and the fact that he was the drummer in the band every day for all that period of time. As it seems to make clear, and let's be really clear about this, right? There's a mindset around this, and it influenced the name of the upcoming album, You Are the Quarry, that Morrissey thought of himself as the victim of unfair and terrible behaviour by greedy and mendacious vampires, as opposed to recognising the fact that that both he and Johnny Marr did very, very well financially out of the Smiths. And why should you begrudge the drummer in the band or the bass player in the band something approaching, maybe let's say 12.5% of the band's total turnover as opposed to 5% of it? It's a bizarre argument. It gets no sympathy from me. And then you go and write a goddamn stupid, dunderheaded death threat, stick it on a CD and think anyone's going to have any sympathy with you. I say, okay, you've made a lot of money. The court costs alone as of 2005 for this case were 1.5 million. This is why people settle on the court steps. Hooky settled on court steps. Lol Tolhurst settled on court steps. This is where you make an agreement that rather than drag each other through the courts left, right and centre until you exhaust all your money and everybody hates everybody and is knackered and tired, you just reach an out-of-court settlement and you agree not to argue with anybody anymore. And the people that are ridiculous and absurd are the people that look at the court situation and go, yeah, I'm going to fight it all the way through as much as I possibly can, without realising that actually, as to quote the great TV show Kung Fu, the true test of strength is knowing when not to use it. Morrissey apparently left England in disgust, so that his assets couldn't be seized, his money couldn't be touched, because even though he'd lost the court case, he then sought to frustrate the application of that. So his London bank account was closed and emptied, and I think Joyce put a lien in on his mother's home, which apparently Morrissey had bought, and kind of going, if you just pay him, all the problems go away and you don't have to spend £1.5 million on court costs. And I don't know how much money that's worth, but to think that somehow Joyce was undeserving of anything more than a mere 10% of the band's performance royalties was, I think, ridiculous and unjustifiable, both morally and in terms of contract understanding. Apparently, Johnny Marr's view was pay him and the problem goes away. And so therefore that's what apparently happens according to what was in here. Sometimes, no matter what happens, money is the thing that needs to solve the problem. And sometimes you can have two people that just absolutely will never agree on certain things. Two people that are in the same situation, but they have different perspectives upon that. They can never agree. And sometimes the best thing that you can do is to meet a middle ground and to compromise. And if you're willing to compromise and the other party isn't, you end up in a situation similar to Morrissey's, where you end up burning down absolutely everything to prove a point that not that many people are really that bold about. But as Spencer said, if anything upsets Morrissey, it is money. And the court case now casts a terrible shadow over the Smiths and their existence. It should never have happened. The split should never have been 10, 40, 40, 10. It should have been 25, 25, 25, 25 in performance royalties. Songwriting royalties, 50-50, Morrissey Marr. I'm happy with that. I think that Rourke was probably dealt with a little unfairly given the enormous contribution his bass lines had. But 25% split to each member of the band for the songwriting? No, I don't think so. But 25% split for the performances, the live stuff, the recording act royalties, absolutely 100%. That is what should have happened. but it isn't. Morrissey clearly feels that Joyce and Rourke were propelled to glory and fame and riches by merely being in the Smiths, as opposed to having any inherent talent. And that's a view I definitely don't subscribe to. I'll put it that way. And I've made that clear about that. But of course, I wouldn't write a song issuing death threats to people. So it's fair to say I don't agree with Morrissey on a great many things, including the cover for this album, which he's not a fan of. But you should never delegate things like the cover of your album. You absolutely shouldn't. But there you are. Right, it feels like I've been talking at you for an hour, and it is time to stop and to see what crisps or biscuits there are downstairs whilst I go and watch a true crime documentary, no doubt about murders, set in a suburban British town about Britain's biggest serial killer you've never heard of, who probably used the back pages of Loot to go and murder people. No doubt, undoubtedly, that would be the plot of an upcoming 86-part Netflix special, which I have to watch all of. So, there you have it. That's Morrissey's 1996 and 1997. Not just an annus horribilis, but what feels like a whole period are generally one to be regretfully just kind of signed off as perhaps not quite as great as I'd originally hoped. Maladjusted has some really great moments in it, by the way. As an album, I strongly recommend it. It has some fantastic tracks on it. It's very underrated by almost everybody. Certainly it's very underrated, I think, by Morrissey, according to what's in this autobiography. I generally think it's a very strong album, actually. And aside from Sorrow Will Come in the End, there is barely a step wrong on it. It has some fantastic material on it. And if you like Morrissey, please do reevaluate this record. Listen to it again and come to it with fresh ears and fresh eyes, because you will find something great in there. It's prescient, it's forward-thinking, it is visionary, actually, in how Morrissey perceives his part in the world, and sadly at the time was nowhere near as well as appreciated as it should be. The next step for Morrissey, the wilderness years. And the next step for me, downstairs for some sweets, biscuits, and a crime documentary on Netflix. I'm going to wrap up here. Stay beautiful. And as the Tower of Bill and Ted has it, be excellent to each other. See you all soon. Adios.